I was thinking of some experiences that I've had with Swami Kriyananda that I included in the book that I wrote about him. Swami Kriyananda being the founder of all of Ananda. He's now almost 85 years old. It's been my great blessing to have known him some 40 years now. And I wrote a book of my own experiences and the experiences of others as well. And one of the facts of my relationship with him is the fact that I was 22 when I met him. And he's about 21 years older than I think. And so I often say that I grew up at Ananda Village, which is the main Ananda community, the first Ananda community. It's in about 4 hours from here in the Sierra Nevada, a rural community, a rural village with the guest retreat and so on. When I first moved there in 1971, it was a very primitive promise of what it was going to be, but very, very undeveloped and totally fun. We just lived in trailers and teepees and had very little money and were very carefree in our life there. But because I was relatively inexperienced, but not lacking in confidence in my erroneous thoughts, I often had great inner disagreements with things that Swami would do. He would be very forceful in his leadership, in his understanding of things, not in any way that, forceful is the wrong word, he was very confident in his own inspiration, and he would present his point of view with a great deal of magnetism. And we didn't have to accept it. It was sort of take it or leave it. If we wanted to be in tune with what he was doing, we would have to try to understand. And many things that he said and did, I just rejected inwardly. I was in a little bit of a bind because I had so much regard for him, and I had such a deep inner sense of his spiritual nature that I knew it was not in my best interest to say, well, I know better than you about this particular thing. But at the same time, I was too filled with my own potential to docilely accept what I didn't agree with. So I developed in myself what I called a mental shelf. At that time, David, a few years afterwards, David and I moved into a dome, a building, a geodesic dome, which are very charming to live in certain ways, but they had almost no straight walls, which make it very difficult to make cabinets and shelves and closets. And so the closet we had was this really peculiar shaped thing with a great deal of it virtually inaccessible. And so naturally we'd keep our everyday things sort of on the front half, and only the stuff that you really never wanted to look at did you put back in that back corner. You know, trinkets that your Aunt Murgatroyd sent you and you really didn't want, but you had to save in case she ever came to visit, things like that. And so you just stuff them back there. And then every so often, you go up to clean things out and you discover something there that just looked terrific, and you couldn't figure out why you were so reluctant to ever have accepted it. It had changed, obviously, or perhaps you had. So I developed in my own mind a corner of my mind, which was very similar to that shelf, where I would package up many of these things that Swami said or did, and I would just stick them there, because they really interfered if they were right in my daily thinking, but I didn't dare throw them away. And of course, as the course of 4 decades goes by, and I have a little more life experience and perhaps a few hard knocks, and begin to become a little more suspicious of my own quick conclusions, a great deal of what I have taken off that shelf over the years just looks marvelous to me. And I can't understand why I was so confused at the beginning. But of course, now I've had this wonderful experience of being 20 years older than Swamiji was when I met him, and meeting a lot of people who are the same age that I was when I met him, who are also quite confident in their own potential, and not necessarily really interested in my alternate point of view. And reflecting on that when I was talking specifically to one young woman one day, and the temptation in my heart to say, don't disagree with me, I know a lot more than you. But before those words could come out of my mouth, I realized that in all the years that I had lived and worked closely with Swamiji, Not one time did he ever say anything that even resembled that. Not one time did he even refer to the difference in our age, the difference in our experience. And believe me, I'm sure he was tempted. At least when I think back on it, I'm sure he was tempted. Only recently did I say something like, I'm sorry, sir, of all the trouble I caused you. And he said, yes, you did thwart me on quite a few occasions, which I thought was an extremely tactful word. You know, more than that, just by being so forceful at times, because he wouldn't contradict me, he really just had to wait. I mean, he couldn't go forward on things. I stopped more than one project. I'm not proud of it, but I did. So when I was dealing with my younger friend, younger than me, not young, the soul is ageless, and out of respect for the training that I had received, and out of respect for this soul's genuine potential and wisdom, I refrained. And then later I went to Swami Kriyananda and I said, sir, now that I'm in the position, a similar position that you were in, I want to thank you for being so respectful all these years of me and never making me feel less merely because I was young and inexperienced. Swami's response, he accepted the compliment graciously, but then this sort of uncomprehending look came over his face. And I sort of, mentally said, what more do you have to say? And he said, well, I never commented on it because I never noticed. I never noticed, is what he said. And he said, I never think of anyone in terms of their chronological age. He said, the soul is ageless. He said, I don't see people's bodies. He said, I don't even see their faces or their gender. He said, all I see is their eyes. And what I see in their eyes is the soul that's living behind it. In fact, quite recently, literally, like a couple of months ago, Swami said to me, I don't know why, he said, your eyes are green, like that. I said, yes, sir. He said, how unusual, just like that. I've known him literally 40 years, and he just noticed. And he also said once about Seva, when he told me this story, he said, Seva, for example, who was a woman he worked with every day, whose characteristic feature was these huge brown eyes, he said, Seva, for example, I never noticed what color her eyes are. And then he looked over at her and he sort of peered and you could see him sort of trying to see her eyes. Oh, he said, they're brown, like that. And this whole other reality came into me, which I do write about when I talk about Swami, which is the difference between understanding what we ought to do and actually becoming what our destiny is to be. Because I had attributed, without really thinking about it, a great deal of Swami's appropriate and uplifting and inspiring relationships with us as the result of his wonderful self-discipline. So-and-so is really irritating, but I'm not going to let them get to me. So-and-so is so callow, and yet so arrogant in their point of view, but I'm going to be gracious to them. So-and-so's personality really rubs me wrong, but I am above it all. I mean, perhaps I'm talking more about myself than about him. But nonetheless, that just this thought. And once again, as he has many times in my life, he surprises me by the revelation of what consciousness really is. Because you see, if we perceive things, we're responding all the time according to our perception. So we perceive people according to gender. We perceive people according to whether they're attractive or not. We look at people, not into their spirit. We see personalities and we respond to that. But none of that is really the reality of what's going on this planet. What's really going on this planet is spirit manifesting at many different vibrations, is just moving and interacting and being together. And behind all of the apparent differences, there's just one reality, just the reality of Om, the divine vibration of the Divine Mother, the spirit of perfect bliss, and everything else we see is actually a misperception. And it's definitely true that at stages of our spiritual life, it becomes a question of, this is how I have always been, but this is how I aspire to be, and therefore I will begin to exert my willpower to bring myself into alignment with my aspirations. And heaven knows, that's a really good idea. It's a really good idea to discipline our impulses, because not every impulse that arises within us is really such a great idea. Even at the beginning when I was saying, sometimes my inclination in my early years to reject things that Swamiji would say to me, I knew that was not a good inclination. So I developed this whole system for accepting it but moving it aside, because that was the best that I could do at that time. I couldn't perceive the wisdom, but at least I wouldn't reject it. But what we're really trying to do is something entirely different. What we're trying to do is awaken a higher capacity to perceive. So the effort to discipline ourselves, it completely disappears. Because when we simply see beauty, when we simply see goodness, when we see divine aspiration, even if not yet fulfilled, then there's nothing to discipline. That's just what we relate to. Now, in this particular passage in the Bible, it's very interesting, because what Jesus is saying here is saying, well, naturally, if things please you in this world, you're not going to have to discipline yourself to accept them. And most people's concept of love is really, well, you pleased me. I think you're attractive. And you think that I'm really special, so I'm going to return the favor and tell you that you're really special too. I mean, think how many songs, think how many millions of dollars have been made by singers who say perfectly, I love you and you love me, and so then you love me and then I love you, and then you're going to love me, so I'm going to love you. And, we really reduce this to kind of a mercantile transaction. You'll give me a certain amount of love, I'll give you a certain amount of love. You'll treat me a certain way, I'll treat you a certain way. It's better than not being nice at all. But the masters come into this world. And what makes the masters, what makes the saints, and the sages, among other things, is that all of that temporary veneer and all of that self-interest is lacking. They don't love because we love them back. They love because it is the only possible response to the creation that they see, given that the presence of God is everywhere. I remember a young man coming up to Swami Kriyananda at our retreat up in Ananda village, and he'd been there a couple of days, and he was transformed by the experience of being in the community. And he said to Swamiji, Sir, I find this whole experience, although deeply moving, absolutely bewildering. He said, I feel more love from you and from people here than I feel even from my own family. He said, how is that possible? You don't even know me. And Swamiji answered him very sweetly and very seriously. And he said, well, you're right. I don't know you in the detailed way that your family would know you. He said, but when I look at you, I see the presence of God, whom I already love. And so it's not difficult for me to love you because that love is already flowing out. It's come to me in a new form, perhaps in a face that I've never seen before, at least not in this lifetime, but the relationship is already established. Now, again, in this Bible passage, what Jesus is talking about when he says, well, you have to love your enemies, not just your friends, he's not really talking about that sort of heroic self-effort that causes us to manage to say, I forgive you, when there's really so much ego still involved in that you might as well not bother, although it's better probably than bashing them over the head with something. But the reason we really love our enemies, because there is no such thing as an enemy. Many people in Swamiji's life have been jealous and anxious to make him look bad or to thwart his efforts to serve Master over complicated and irrelevant disagreements, theological disagreements, the kind of thing that the world is rife with. You know, this, even in this Bible passage, it says, even though we're persecuted, even though we're betrayed, even though we're misunderstood, you know, we try to think that those things don't happen, but heavens, they're all around us. We see it everywhere. If we're fortunate enough to be spared, then just wait till the next incarnation. You know, it comes to all of us because it's a necessary challenge to our ability to look past the obvious and see the divine underneath. So when Jesus says it's not enough to love your friends, you must also love your enemies. You also must love those who persecute you and do you wrong and in every way try to hurt you. And it's not really like a social dictum so that the whole world will be nicer and run better. It's because we must develop within us that degree of divine consciousness that we are incapable of perceiving enemies. I've been so impressed in this sense also, since I'm really on the stories of Swami Kriyananda, by what I call his positive perception of reality. He perceives reality positively, but with supreme accuracy and intelligence, which is a very fine line. Because many people, in their attempt not to see negative things, not to allow themselves to be judgmental, will just sort of work with about a quarter of their perceptions and just keep everything else like this. And it gets to be a kind of cheerful, but a little bit ungrounded way of looking at things, where affirmation divorces itself from reality. Swami Kriyananda had dinner one evening with a couple. They were from Europe, and another friend of mine was present. I wasn't at that dinner, but I know all the people involved. And they had a less than inspiring marriage, that couple did. They were exceedingly unkind to one another and never made any effort to hide it. Their just natural way of behaving was awful. And after the dinner was over, the friend said to Swamiji, "Oh, I'm so glad to be away from those people." He said the negativity between them was so thick you could cut it with a knife. And Swamiji said, "Was it like that? You know?" And then this man gave Swami a list of all the different things that had sort of happened just in the course of their dinner. And then Swamiji sort of withdrew into himself for a moment and thought about it. He said, "You know, it's interesting," he said, "because when I think back," and my friend agreed that was true, "everything I did was an attempt to create harmony between them. Everything I did was an attempt to lift their awareness to a higher level so they could see something other than that what we were relating to. But," he said, it never occurred to me to define their energy as negative. It was simply was what it was reality, and then now let us give to it something uplifting." Now, that's the difference between basic human consciousness and the awareness of the divine. That's why this whole passage in the Bible, love those who persecute you and so on, ends with, "Be ye therefore perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." Because imagine what it would be like for us if God were guided by his personal preferences. I mean, it's a ludicrous thought, isn't it? I mean, only the most attractive of us would ever really get to heaven. Can't you just see like the doorway to heaven is like a beauty contest? You know, only the really Hollywood types get in. We all have desperate plastic surgery before we die in the hope that we can make it. You know, it's just all ridiculous because the very definition of our relationship with the divine is that this is the one place where we don't have to put on a face, where we don't have to pretend, where we don't have to be something that we're not already. We just are accepted and loved entirely for what we really are. Swami Kriyananda tells a story about his life with Paramhansa Yogananda, whom we call Master. And Swamiji was, there was a Hollywood singer. This was when in Los Angeles, and there was this Hollywood singer who used to come and visit Yogananda, visit Master often, and he kind of liked the glamour of being part of this scene and so on, and so he was asserting that he was interested in learning to meditate and learning this and that, but whenever Swamiji would make an appointment, because Master asked Swami to teach him, he would never show up. He would show up for the glamorous times with the guru, but he would never really come to get serious. So when he came again to see Yogananda, and Swami Kriyananda was there. He was very cold to this man. He thought, you've been rude to me, I'll be rude to you. And afterwards, Master said, you were very cold with him. And Swamiji said, well, he's not really sincere. He doesn't keep his appointments. He says he's going to do these things, but he doesn't. And Master said, I wonder where you all would be if I treated you like that. Because that's the truth of it, We think that, what we have to do is we have to be so stern, and we have to be, we have to have our boundaries, and we have to tell people this, and we have to give them what we think, and we have to do all this stuff. But Divine Mother just loves us. She just loves us. She loves us because we are her own children. We are her, just in the way that a human child is made from the body of the mother. And even though afterwards it wanders about and appears to have a separate life, the mother and the father's relationship, but we speak often of the mother in this sense. The mother knows, you're flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone, you're my own. I made you. Your body grew inside of me. Well, the reason that even exists in the human world, because everything in the human world is really just a reflection of the higher truth. The reason it exists is so that through that symbol we'll get a glimpse of our eternal nature. I mean, yes, your human mother made your human body, but your human body lasts such a brief period of time and it just disintegrates and goes away. It all breaks apart and even the atoms just go somewhere else and do something else afterwards. It seems like a long time when it's happening, but compared to eternity it isn't long. That's why it's merely symbolic of that which is everlasting. And what is everlasting is, yes, our spiritual self, our very being, that which I call, that everything I think I am, came out of the body of Divine Mother. The body of Divine Mother is the Om vibration, and the Om vibration is manifested through spirit. I mean, we don't have to sit around and try to love our own hand. We don't have to try to feel unity, with this finger and then this finger and then this finger, because it's part and parcel of what we are accustomed to thinking of oneself. Now just imagine being so extended in our consciousness into every part of creation that it's not a question of bridging distance. It's that there's no distance to bridge. Just everywhere we are. Swami Kriyananda, again, in a time he used to like to go to Disneyland before Disneyland became so much less innocent. It's not innocent anymore, but in the 70s we would go there sometimes because it was very innocent fun in those days. And also he liked to take us because he said Walt Disney was such a great karma yogi that everything was so well done there. He would show us how really to do things to perfection. And once we went there, about 12 of us together, and Swamiji had all his favorite rides, and we raced through that park, and we had a marvelous day. And when it was getting to be sundown, we wanted to be on the sidewalk when the electric parade, I don't know if they still do any of this was so long ago, where all the characters all dressed in illumination come down. It's really astrally beautiful. And so we were, about 12 of us just gathered together, and there were crowds gathering, and this mood came over Swamiji, and he became very withdrawn, and he looked out over this vast crowd, and you know how it is in Disneyland, all kinds of people from all countries and all ages, and very, very mixed. And he looked out and he said very quietly, he said, imagine not merely loving all these people, but being everyone around you. And then he said, that's the consciousness of a master. That was Master's consciousness. That's what it was to live with him. And then this inward mood just struck us all. And Swami just sat down on the sidewalk, and we all sat down next to him. We all started meditating. I don't know what the people around us thought, but there was like this crowd of about 12 of us, and we meditated for about half an hour, just so deep in that thought. And then just a little piece of that just, crept into our awareness, a little bit of that consciousness. And for those moments, there was this effortless capacity to embrace all of creation and everyone in it. No discipline, no affirmation, just true perception. And then there was this big commotion, and we opened our eyes, and we were surrounded by people, and the electric parade was coming down in front of us, and so we sort of just stood up, but it was perfect because we came out with all these flashing lights, and there it was. But you see, every so often Divine Mother gives us a glimpse. Every so often Divine Mother leans over and just sprinkles us with fairy dust, whenever it might be. And all of our efforts suddenly end in ease. And we see where it is that we are going, and we sense who it is we might become. This life is so filled with so many unexpected events, often events that we ourselves would not have chosen if we had ever actually been asked, if our ego was asked. Our soul takes them on and embraces them with great joy. The ego afterwards said, "This might have seemed like a good idea a long time ago, but it seems like a really bad idea now that it's happening." And so we have a constant choice. I was talking about this last week, which is we either parse apart this world. I like this, I don't like this came out right, this didn't, this is what I wanted to have, this isn't what I wanted to have. We love those that please us, and we close our hearts to those who don't. And we do that a lot. And it's an experiment we're constantly running. And one healer asked me once when I went to her for some help with a difficulty I was having in my life, she just said so sweetly, "And so how is this working for you?" Like that. "And so what are you getting from this?" "Nothing, it's terrible." She just smiled at me, and then I thought to myself, "Oh yeah, I'm getting a lot from this. I'm getting the pleasure of being miserable. I'm getting all the drama of being miserable. I'm getting the opportunity not to have to go on with my life because I get to just stay here." There were a lot of answers to how this was working for me. So every time we find ourselves self-righteous, judgmental, closing our heart, we have to ask ourselves, and so how is this working for me? So how do I feel about this? Am I in bliss now? Is this really a good idea? And piece by piece, lifetime by lifetime, minute by minute, we do fight this battle until the pleasure and ultimately the bliss of right consciousness becomes so irresistible to us that it's no longer a discipline to have it. In fact, it's a curse to do anything else. That's when our true spiritual life, when the fruit of our spiritual efforts comes true. When God challenges us to love something that we don't want to love. Swamiji once was struggling in the midst of betrayal from erstwhile friends, and he had developed what he thought was the right attitude of acceptance. But then one day he was feeling quite down about it, and he was praying. He said to Babaji, "Babaji, why are you allowing people to treat me like this? I've dedicated my life to serving you. Why would this be happening?" And he was thinking of his erstwhile friends who were not behaving well. And he said he felt Babaji in his heart, and he heard this voice. Babaji said, "They are all my children." It's really like going to Mother and saying, "Mother, baby brother is icky, let's take him back." It was a lovely story from a sibling rivalry. The little girl says to her mother, "Don't you think the baby is icky? Let's take him back." Don't we feel that way? We look at one of our brothers and sisters and we say, "Don't you think he's icky? Why don't we just take him back?" And Mother says, "You're all my children. Be ye therefore perfect, as your Father in heaven is perfect. Love as the divine loves." And what happens as a result of that? We become that divine.